Welcome to Essential Ingredients, powered by Next Gen Purpose. EI serves up thoughtful conversations with industry leaders and pioneers who support a regenerative future for our food system. The stories shared by our guests are meant to spark curiosity and inspire informed global change. So welcome to Essential Ingredients. I'm your host, Justine Reichman. Today with me is MJ Kinney, who is the principal and food scientist of FareScience. Welcome, MJ.
Hey, thank you so much, Justine, for having me.
Welcome, MJ, fellow New Yorker. I'm so excited to chat with you and learn more about FareScience and what you're up to.
Likewise, I like that we both have taken this path from East Coast to West Coast and are happily both in the West Coast.
Me too. I mean, you're in Southern California, I'm in Northern California, but either way, we both landed here.
Yeah, it is such a huge state and it's really, really cool. I have yet to actually drive up north to really experience like all of the beauty in the state, but I just love that you can kind of have, in a matter of 2 hours, you could still be in California and have a completely different landscape and experience. Like it's snow to hot weather, it's beautiful.
It's so true, because when I think about living in New York, I think about all the states on the Northeast corridor that we could travel to in a couple hours, right? Within
that's true,
yeah. Connecticut. I mean, when I lived in New York City, I could be in Connecticut in 45 minutes. I could be in Pennsylvania in an hour and a half. I could be in Delaware in an hour and 20 minutes. I mean, you could be in Washington, D.C. in 4 hours. The Northeast corridor has so many different places you can go to, but in California.
I have to say, because I have made the drive from upstate New York to Florida several times, and every time I was like, that is the last time, but I've done it, I think now 4 times. And it is a really nice thing to be able to say, I'm now in this state, like you've accomplished all these states at the end of your day. And I think if you were doing a road trip from like, the southernmost part of California, or like Arizona all the way to like Washington or Canada, that would be it would feel very unremarkable for progress along the way of that road trip.
I drive to LA. My dad lives in LA and I drive there for work or to go visit him.
Yeah.
It's a 5.5 hour drive or 6 hours. And you're still in the same state. You're driving on the 5. I mean, the mile markers or the milestones that you make are just unremarkable on the way.
Do you ever take the Pacific Coast Highway though?
I haven't done the Pacific Coast Highway. I did the 101. I went from Santa Barbara back.
Okay.
We are on the water, but I don't think it's the one.
It's so remarkably beautiful. And I would just suggest that if you do it, that you get a friend to drive for you so that you can selfishly absorb the view. Because it's so distracting.
So which side of the road, but I have to do it on the way back from Southern California so that I'm not on the side of the highway because I'm afraid of heights. So I don't want to be on the cliff side going down.
Strategizing.
I need to strategize that. So, well, the next time I come up and the next time you come down, you'll have to let me know.
Okay.
So in the meantime, for all our guests listening or watching, MJ, tell us about FareScience.
Oh, so FareScience.
Yeah. I do want to chat with you and we can probably chat all afternoon, but I think our listeners would really appreciate learning a little bit more about you and FareScience.
Yeah, thank you. FareScience is the name of my consulting company. It kind of came about by, I wouldn't say mistake, but it started off originally being a blog between a food science friend and myself. And I just really liked the name. So when I decided to go into my own business, I decided to carry that name with me. And fair just being obviously a synonym for the word food, as in food science, kind of try to be creative there. But I also wanted to, it's yet to be done really intentionally in my line of work, but it is a value of mine to incorporate more equity into really any industry, but especially the food industry, when we work with so many different types of people from so many different types of backgrounds in order to accomplish the supply chain that we have to make the foods that we consume. So Fair also has a little bit of that in the inner workings as well as a value system. But essentially what I do is I'm a food scientist. I specialize in food product development, more specifically the plant-based space and plant-based meat, egg, and dairy products. And what I'll do with my clients is I'll sit down with them and understand the concept or the idea that they want to launch. And when I say launch, I mean not really in like the food service sector, but like the grocery retail segment. And defining that concept to a reality that I could create a tangible prototype. And so I go from concept to prototype or minimum viable product, and then to a scale that starts benchtop or kitchen, but works its way to a pilot, and then eventually to a commercial scale of production. And that involves sourcing ingredients, and it also involves finding a contract manufacturer, which are very difficult things to do, but things that weirdly I enjoy doing.
So, wow, that's super exciting. So you studied food science in school, I'm assuming.
Yes, I did. I went to school at the University of Florida, food science and human nutrition. I actually think most of my education was honestly in my internship experience after graduating with my bachelor's degree. There really was this idea that I had to get a master's degree in order to do food R&D. And I wasn't convinced, and I'm glad, because I went into an internship experience that taught me so much about how the industry actually works, that gave me a lens beyond what academia could afford me. And then in addition to that, it put me on the ground floor of a really big change that was happening. And that was, talking about or even coining the phrase plant-based and offering more than just soy protein in the plant protein world when it came to the food that we ate.
So was that what sparked the interest for you to focus on plant-based specifically?
Well, so how it happened was I was always interested in understanding, it wasn't called plant-based, it was more like the vegetarian diet. And there were just some things from a very logical standpoint that didn't make sense to me. I just thought, do we really need to be eating as much meat as we do? And, I didn't identify, and I still don't really identify as a vegetarian, but I just thought, why aren't we ever being taught what foods we should be eating from the plant kingdom when it's so much of a focus to be consuming dairy and meat? And it was just so obvious, even within my curriculum in college, but also just growing up in the time that I was growing up. I also have a couple of food intolerances, which really widely weren't acknowledged by doctors. And so I had to do a lot of self-discovery to figure out what works for my body. Mm-hmm. And so I was curious about veganism and vegetarianism. I actually didn't think that the idea of having these strict rules with only consuming non-animal products was sustainable, but I just thought, hey, we're not even talking about it. And so my first internship experience was actually with this company called Purist. You may have heard of them. Actually, I think you interviewed Nicole.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have. Yeah. And wait, I want to circle back to one thing. Yeah. You mentioned veganism and vegetarianism, but you didn't mention flexitarianism.
True, which is where I landed.
That's a newer word that people are using now, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think it's a good word to be using because maybe reasons why, veganism and vegetarianism didn't stick for a good portion of the population was this purist mentality, when really we're humans that are filled with conflicting ideas and to create a very purist nature within any facet of our life is rather unsustainable. So why not a flexitarian diet?
Yeah, I think that flexitarianism makes it realistic and palatable for people. Yeah. And I also feel like it's when people strive for veganism or vegetarianism, there's a potential for failure there when you stray, or if there's the cheat, you could cheat, or those things. But when there's flexitarianism, for the people that maybe are not quite there, or maybe want to have it here and there, they don't have to feel shame around including it in their diet when maybe they want it once every blue moon or something. It doesn't have to be a negative thing.
Yeah.
But they can still have, they can still be the person that they want and work towards having a plant-based diet, whether it's better for them as a person, for the planet, whatever their value system may be.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I just thought it was a more positive way for people, because I feel like there's just so much shame around it. But
for sure, there definitely was. I remember being afraid to want to even understand vegetarianism and veganism because it became more of a topic that wasn't about what is healthy, but almost like a cult or a religion, or and it's not that it is that at all. But that was just the perception, and it was a negative perception. And I think the perception was so widely acknowledged that it, created institutions like the Good Food Institute to come out and say hey, like our messaging isn't working. Maybe it hasn't been for some time. Let's approach it another way.
Right. And I also felt there was not that there, I mean, there is some activism around it in many instances. And I'm not going to say that we don't want to activate for those, for the animals or for this or for that. But, and I think that there's a lot of good work being done around it. And that being said, I feel like oftentimes it can be also alienating for people, and it can feel very scary when you walk into that, to learn about it, to talk about it. So, I mean, we're so on another.
Well, yeah, it's very related to like how plant-based came to be, because, plant-based was a term I remember kind of inventing with the Purist team before pea protein was cool. And at that time, they were taking this really big bet in transitioning out of soy protein and going into pea protein. Back when, if you looked at the B2B ingredient marketplace, you could still find pea protein that was green, and you really couldn't find it isolated beyond like a 60% concentrate. And suddenly they were releasing ingredients that were neutral in color, flavor and aroma as best as it could be at that time. And, they've only improved as well as the whole market, but also something that was not green. So, it's just to say plant-based was born, this term, and I think it was widely used, and then it just became adopted by the industry because it was like, how do we tell consumers that this is not necessarily a vegan product, but that it has maybe some of these same values, or that it incorporates majority plant-based ingredients without calling it vegan, because we know that that's not resonating with consumers.
As a food scientist, what's your motivation for building up the plant-based innovation space?
Oh, I think there's a lot of reasons. Like, I believe there should be more options available. And I think about selfishly consumers like myself who, consume almost anything on a values basis whenever I purchase, that is a vote in some favor of something. And sometimes it's so foreign and so far, I don't grasp the impact that I'm making. But with food, it's really hard for me to ignore what I know. And so I'm not vegan, but it's very hard for me to eat animals and really any kind of meat. Do I do it on occasion? Yeah, I do. I kind of feel a little bad about it, to be honest, which is maybe something that I need to work on. But just to have an option for people like myself, or people who can resonate with that story a little bit, to say, I can have something that like tastes like meat, looks like meat. I can serve it to people that like to eat meat, and they maybe wouldn't know otherwise. But the other thing too is like, what kind of impacts could this new like kind of invention of products do for human health? And I like to usually stay away from like the story of healthfulness or what is healthy. But one of the things I find interesting that no one's talking about is we're essentially, through plant-based products, given this opportunity to introduce new ingredients to the human diet and a diversity all at once. Because as you may know, when it comes to the protein story, it's usually a combination of plant proteins or plant protein sources to create this complete protein profile. And so I'm interested in knowing how this is going to have an impact and how this could actually benefit the way people eat or their health in the long term.
Yeah, I think so too. Because especially as you were talking about, well, you have your own intolerances, I have my own intolerances, and so many other people do too. And for people that are plant forward, a lot of the proteins come from, it could be nuts, it could be all these different things.
Yeah.
And for myself, like, I'm allergic to a variety of nuts, which makes a whole host of issues if you're going to try to eat plant-based.
Plant-based is hard for you.
It could be really hard, right? Mm-hmm. So introducing these new plant proteins can open up options. So I'm excited to hear more about these innovations as they come down the pipeline, to see what other things we can eat. And also the taste, because taste is king, let's be honest, right? Like, if it doesn't taste, nobody wants to eat it. Mm-hmm. Right? So, I mean, and I like my food. So it's interesting to see. We went to the the Mindful Food and Film Festival this weekend in Marin. I don't know if you heard about it. It was the third one that they had. It was this weekend. I'll send you some info on it.
Yeah, actually, I would like that.
And there were a couple of films that were done. One was on factory farming, some different things like that. But then they had a whole host of vegan food there from different places. And what was interesting was things that I had never seen before. Some of it I have because of the space that I'm in and we're in. So obviously it's not completely new to me, but I thought it was interesting to bring that all together so that people can be more exposed to the different options that are out there. And I thought it was super interesting. And I'll share it with you. It's called the Mindful Food and Film Festival, Miyoko's Creamery.
Yep.
She was the one that, she was one of the sponsors. She put it together because she has a, something called Rancho Compasión.
Okay.
Pardon my accent. It's really bad. It's a compassionate sanctuary for animals. And this is their fundraiser. She raised money for this compassionate sanctuary where they house about 100 animals or so. And so it's around education so people can better understand how to be compassionate around animals. And so I'll send you some information.
Yeah. So was she, and among other people, just displaying different products, or
they were having different products? There was a green carpet the night before, you know, with the screening of a film called The Smell of Money. And that was all about the factory farming in North Carolina with the pig farms. I don't know if you'd heard about that. Smithfield, I think it was. So that was, I'll send you the info. And then there was the what was going on with the elk in Marin County, and then there were some other films going on. Anyway, it was really interesting and really eye-opening to what's going on with the way that they're treating animals, just as information, just as what's going on to how the treatment of the animals, to be more compassionate to these animals. And, you know, not necessarily about, you know, the way that we're eating them, but the way that the humans are treating them, that they'd have a better life if they were left to go on their own, basically. But anyway, I'll send you the information. And for those of you that eating food and film festival, and they'll have another one next year.
Yeah. Your dog is popping in the background every once in a while. Very cute. I thought it was like a little deer. He's so sweet.
Yes, she does. We have two dogs, Minnie and Misty. She's a rescue. This is Minnie.
Hi.
Oh, you can see her face a little for those of you that can't see her. She's a little mini chihuahua.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Okay, so you're working on these new things. What are you working on, something now that you can share?
So I always make it a point to be developing a food product while also doing kind of like dabbling in other areas. Admittedly, a lot of my time is dedicated to X Prize right now. We are in our semifinal stage of the competition. We're going to be hosting the actually semifinals event in Abu Dhabi in November. So seeing where these, I think it's now 28 teams and where they are with their prototypes. I think it's 8 different species of fish, 1 species of chicken, but chicken breast and fish fillet, so whole muscle cuts. And we've already seen videos, you know, as a part of the verification process, which are like miraculously close and beyond my expectation. I'm very, very excited to see these in person. And also, I should just say, I'm not even going to be tasting the samples. We have a judging panel that does that. But I am behind the scenes working on, you know, all kinds of things. So we have somebody who's helping us in the capacity of a sensory analysis expert, designing the sensory experiment, as I guess you could call it an experiment, but essentially the sensory design that we're going to be having with our judging panel, which is 12 members, and they're going to be trained on how to evaluate chicken breasts using the animal origin reference, as well as each type of fish species that's involved in this competition. And instead of, you know, grading the sensory aspect on something subjective, like what is their personal opinion on whether or not they like the prototype, right? It's actually going to be how closely does this prototype mimic the animal origin reference itself.
Wow.
So, I mean, very exciting, you know, data that's going to be coming out of this. And from 28 teams globally, there's really nothing like it. But that's what's taking up most of my time and my energy. And I'm really happy to be a part of it. But it's a lot of thinking, and the thinking break that I need is to get my hands dirty and actually be developing. So it's probably pretty limited what I can talk about, but they are all within the plant-based meat, egg, and dairy categories. working on restructured and whole muscle cut products right now. So developing plant-based meat essentially that replicates an animal origin reference that's different than what's currently being offered in the market. Also actively working on some projects that have been underway for a number of years, because there are, you can have a really great formulation, but unfortunately it won't always see the light of day for reasons that are really beyond one's control, or require a very steep reevaluation. And what I'm referring to is like the limited capacity for contract manufacturers. Are you familiar with contract manufacturing and how? Okay, so.
But that being said, we might have listeners that are not familiar with.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. You're right.
So like, let's go into that a little bit.
So a contract manufacturer is a manufacturer that will build your food product for you, and in the massive quantities that it takes for it to exist in a retail segment. But they also produce products for other customers, or they might actually produce products for themselves under their own brand. But essentially, they are the keystone because they own the manufacturing facility, the equipment, the labor, the people who are absolutely essential to the process of producing your product. So you can have a formula, which will be in a spreadsheet. You will have all of your ingredient suppliers that are sourced, which are in multiple spreadsheets. And all of the documents to verify their specifications and their safety. And then you can produce it, benchtop, which for me is in my kitchen, but for a lot of food companies, it's within their lab environments, which by the way, in the food world don't differ too much. And then, you'll scale it to a pilot facility, which oftentimes I like to use the contract manufacturer as the pilot facility. But you can also go to, oftentimes land-grant universities will have their own pilot facility program. So those are all the steps that are needed before you get to the contract manufacturer. And it'll take easily 6 months, working on a really fast timeline, by the way, to get there. And then you get to the contract manufacturing part and you realize that no one's going to take you because their minimum order quantities, like basically the amount of volume they need from you, is so huge. And you're like, wait, I thought you guys entertained the idea of helping startups. Like, did I miss something on your website where it explicitly says that you help startups? It's very awkward. It's very awkward. But essentially, if you don't meet their minimum order quantities, also sometimes they're just not the right people fit. Not everybody is in business.
Right.
Or just geographical constraints. Maybe you actually want to launch on the West Coast. Why would you have your manufacturer all the way on the East Coast?
That's right.
If you have a product with a very short shelf life because you insist on high pressure pasteurization, or basically a non-heat form of pasteurization. It's so many factors, but that one is kind of the holdup for a lot of projects. So knock on wood, fortunately, a manufacturer came through after a 1.5 year search.
That's all? 1.5 years?
That's all?
Kidding. It was a joke.
I was like, hey, I've heard of really long.
I'm just kidding. It was a joke.
Yeah, 1.5 years. But I mean, I've heard of longer. You're really lucky, honestly, if you can do it in under a year in today's world. There are so many players that are interested in this space. And once the big players are interested, and if they don't want to use their own manufacturing facility, any contract manufacturer is knocking at their door. So
I got a question for you. So with all these innovations that you're doing, and they sound remarkable, when do you think we'll see some of this stuff on menus in restaurants? So
the products that I'm working on, there might actually be one available for you to view in food service. That wouldn't be until 2023 and in the summer at the soonest. But everything else would be available at a grocery retail level, I'm pretty sure. And so hopefully you'll see some innovations in the plant-based dairy category as soon as Q1 of 2023, closer to January than I think any of the other ones. I think, was it in Singapore where they had the plant-based meats, right, on the menu? Oh, I think you're referring to the cell-based meat specifically, cell-based meat. So like, to me, that was like a big deal, right? That's a big deal to have those on the menu, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, when do you think we'll see stuff like that here? Oh, so you want to know when, I thought you wanted to know when my innovation. No, yours, I do. I want to know when yours were, but now I'm curious when you think we'll see stuff like that on the menus here. Yeah, I got it. So cell-based ingredients I have worked with to do very basic prototype formulations, usually for the purpose of showcasing what their ingredient looks and tastes like to a potential investor. When that will be available in consumer retail within the US is a huge unknown. And if I gave you a number, I would just be throwing a number.
Throwing it out.
Yeah. Oh, like
I was just curious. I was just
You know?
curious. But to get back to yours, I mean, that's amazing that it's going to be in stores and on menus so soon.
Yeah. And take a look at my website, because a lot of the products that I've made are already on store shelves. And that's a really, really cool thing to be able to accomplish.
It's huge. That's a huge thing.
I mean, it's really cool because it's just like this combination of all of my experiences in the food industry that really brought me up to this moment, and they're all interacting with one another. So I worked in the B2B ingredient marketplace, and I learned so much from that world: how to formulate food products, how to find ingredients, who the suppliers were. That really did a lot of the heavy lifting when I went into independent consulting. But I also worked in the B2C side to know what it's like to cross up, product over a finish line to the point where you have it to consumers and you're even interacting with the consumers, like getting responses or feedback that aren't positive and knowing what to do with that information,
Mm-hmm.
And also getting ones that are positive, just being like, I'm so glad I do what I do, or messages where people are like, thank you for giving me, honestly, the most impactful ones when you're like, why do I do this, is like when you hear from somebody who's had kind of like a crippling food intolerance or allergy, and they suddenly have an alternative. And then if they throw their kid in there, I'm just tears.
Right. Of course.
Being able to produce something for them. But I think I actually forgot your question, which was, when are cell-based ingredients going to be in the retail segment?
Which you answered.
Which I answered.
No, you said you don't know, and if you gave me something, it would be just making it up, basically.
Yeah, I would just be making it up. Yeah,
just be making it up, which is a fair enough answer.
Okay, I'm glad. I don't want to lie.
I want you to be honest. I don't want you to make stuff up.
I don't want to pretend the answers. I am one of those people who, if I don't know the answer, I'll tell you. And
that's good.
I'll be like, but I can find out.
Well, hey, listen, if you can find that answer, I'll come back, and then we'll put that up there too. But in the meantime, I don't want to just put something up that's not right.
Yeah, I will say, if someone is interested in really understanding how long it's going to be for cell-based ingredients to reach the US market, a couple of things they can do, and these are some very shameless plugs I'm going to put in there, is they can go to xprize.org/feed, FEED, and they can subscribe to their newsletter, because you're talking about half of the 28 teams in our semifinals that are they're going to be showcasing a cell-based prototype in Abu Dhabi this November. So that's going to be something you want to follow, because not saying we're going to share a lot of information with outsiders, right? But at least XPRIZE is going to know internally where these prototypes are and how feasible they are in coming into the marketplace. And we're going to share some of that information, not all of it, but it's probably going to be one of the only assessments of its kind that can do that. And then the other thing I would do is, when subscribing, is keep a lookout for the webinars that are specific to cell-based or cultivated meat and its regulation, because we're having those conversations now between the US, the EU, and Singapore. So It's a pretty interesting crowd that they pulled together. And I know we've had 2 webinars on that so far.
Okay, and then for our guests that are listening today or watching today that want to keep up with what you're up to, because they listen to your story and they're interested in what you're doing and they want to follow you to Abu Dhabi and check out how you're doing, how might they do that?
Well, I have to say I'm not very present on any social media platform. I do have a LinkedIn, and you are welcome to connect with me on there. I apologize in advance for all the interaction I won't be doing. Honestly, if you really want to get in touch and know what I'm up to, I recommend going to my website. It's FareScience.com. It's FARE science. And on there, you can view my free resources. I do a little bit of writing if you are interested in understanding what it takes to launch a food product, or to go from this idea concept stage to an actual launch. There are free resources to really understand that space better, which will almost always involve, unless you are a technical person, hiring a food scientist or a product developer consultant. The other thing I'll say is that I will be going to Protein Industries Canada, their annual general meeting, which is in mid-September. which is pretty exciting. That'll be in Winnipeg, Canada, Midwest. So that would be how you can find me. LinkedIn, my website, and then, maybe some of the same events.
That sounds good. And you know what? Hopefully you'll stay in touch with us, and we'll have a little update from you after the conference, after the competition as well.
That sounds great. Yeah, actually, I would love to have a conversation with you in November. Maybe not. Okay, hold on. Let me think about this. November, we're going to be there for 2 to 3 weeks. And then I think it's going to be like, I get back right in the nick of time for Thanksgiving. So it might be early December or starting off 2023.
Okay, well, we will organize it so that we get a recap and we can find out what happened and how you're doing and what.
Yeah, that'd be really cool.
We'll do that. We'll bring you back then. How's that?
That sounds great.
So guys, stay tuned for an update from MJ, and we'll keep tabs on her in the meantime.
That sounds great. Just stay tuned for 3-4 months.
MJ, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank
so
you,
great to meet you, to connect with you, to learn all about what you're doing.
Likewise.
I'm excited to find out your products. I'm going to go online, check them out, and see where I can get them.
All right.
And I hope to see them on the menus in restaurants soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Justine.
I want to thank our guests for tuning in, and we'll see you here next week.
To learn more about these episodes and access show notes, go to nextgenpurpose.com and choose podcast. If you like this episode, head to Apple Podcasts or your favorite platform to subscribe and leave us a review. Visit the Next Gen Purpose YouTube channel to subscribe to our EI videocast and give this episode a like while you're there. Follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn at Next Gen Purpose, and connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram at Justine_Reichman. Thanks for joining us.